In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. Good morning. All of those readings talking about rootedness and soil and things that were planted feels a little too soon after Friday night's windstorm, I think. I hope all of you are okay. I know some of us are still without power here. Know that if you need anything, I hope you'll call us, and we're glad to help. And if you've made it through unscathed, know that for the next one, you can always call. I couldn't help but talk about the parable. I just wanted to frame it a little bit before jumping into that, though. So our 6-year-old son has a pretty finely tuned, personalized playlist on Spotify that he loves to curate. The list ranges from songs from his current favorite musical, at least current favorite musical to listen to, Matilda, to the current favorite, seemingly favorite of every child from the recent Super Mario Brothers movie, Peaches, to Alicia Keys and Taylor Swift. There's even some John Denver in there. The playlist has it all. Actually, what he seems to really love to do, at least lately, beyond just listen to it, is to open one of our phones, pull up Spotify, and click through the recommended songs that the algorithm pulls up for him to find and to add something to it. Earlier this week, the algorithm offered up a song I had not previously known from called Let It Grow from the Lorax movie from 2012. The chorus goes like this. Let it grow like it did so long ago. It's just one tiny seed, but it's all we really need. It's time to change the life we lead, time to let it grow. Now, one of the simultaneous joys and hazards of the life of a preacher is that nearly everything can be used in a sermon at some point or another. So when I heard this, and knowing that reading from Matthew's Gospel was before us this week, I knew the parable of the sower would be at the heart of the sermon for today. The truth is that I love this parable, but I haven't always had any sort of real feelings one way or the other. It's just always kind of been a neutral kind of thing for me. This isn't one of those that has drawn me in since I first heard it, since I was a little kid or something like that. It hasn't always been a source of inspiration. I'm not really sure why, but it just is. There are others that do. And frankly, maybe this is part of it. I'm just critical of my people like me. I think it can invite some laziness on the preacher's part. A trap I'll try to avoid for today, as Jesus not only tells the parable, but then lays out the description of just what it means too. Just read that whole second paragraph. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. That is what is sown on the path. As for what is sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. This does not seem to be one of those parables that Jesus wants us to have myriad interpretation options for. Matthew seems to want us to hear something in particular. It's totally fine to stay there. I don't mean to be critical, only to say that this rather straightforward parable and the subsequent explanation, after hearing it, I often find myself saying, okay, got it. Be good soil, cultivate good soil. Despite all of that, though, for probably a year or more, I have found myself surprised by this parable. And quite unexpectedly, it has become a story that I have returned to over and over. All of it changed when I heard and noticed one part that I hadn't really before. And I returned to it because I believe within that small bit is one of the clearest and simplest ideas for our lives as followers of Jesus. And yet within its simplicity lies a deceptive challenge, moving us more fully into the life that God has in mind for us, away from the many ways our lives are pulled away from God's call. And all of that, at least for me, is in the beginning. Matthew tells us that Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Evidently, the crowds had gathered so much so by this point, whether to learn more because they had heard about some guy who had been doing some completely unexplained miracles and needed to see for themselves, or really probably for any reason under the sun, perhaps parental guilt. They gathered to the point that Jesus needed to teach them by getting into a boat while they stayed on the shore. And this was how they would hear him best when he starts, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. A sower went out to sow." That time when this parable became sort of renewed for me just recently, that time I heard that line and thought to myself, right, what else would a sower do? I mean, it seems to me that Jesus could have started the parable, so there was a sower sowing some seeds, or a person sowing seeds was walking along. But instead we get a sower went out to sow. We hear the sower's purpose. You see, what struck me is what the sower was doing is simply the work that the sower was given to do, and nothing more and nothing less. What the sower was doing was everything the sower had within their control, not anything else. What the sower was doing was just the next thing they were called to, not borrowing worry about something that would never come to pass, or that wasn't really their responsibility in the first place. The sower wasn't worried, wasn't frozen by the fact that they had tried that before, that people might not like it, that success, whatever that means, might not come. They weren't bound up in fear of what could happen or even desperately engineering the result they had in mind. They weren't worried about their qualifications or giftedness, about all of the things they had messed up or gotten right, rather that just doing the work that was needed and vital and essential and that was theirs in that moment and in that time. It seemed to me that doing just this is our vocation too. And though it may be a relatively straightforward idea to understand, it is a profoundly challenging vocation for our lives. The temptations before us are ever present, and they are myriad to stray. We might think it up to us to ensure that each seed is carefully, lovingly placed in just the right spot, one by one. The fear of whatever imagined possibilities we've conjured up in our own minds paralyze us from believing more fully in the possible. We are left, we are stuck in an imagination of the impossible. But the life of faith that Jesus calls us to is one that invites us always to imagine what is possible over what is impossible. Just might what come to be, and not all of the reasons it won't work. We might think it is up to us to make the right outcome for the seed come to pass. We're the only ones, after all, that can make it happen. We'll curate the lighting to be just at the exact right brightness. We'll manage the temperature to be ideal. We'll make sure the soil moisture levels are perfect. After all, if we aren't the ones at work, it will never turn out right. Perhaps I'm the only one that does that. Pulled into this temptation from my life. I don't know. But what I do know is that the God we give our lives to follow isn't making cost-benefit assessments to know where to be at work in the world. God isn't calling only the successful or the place and the person with the best odds. And God surely isn't afraid of the places and people in this world we all too often think of as forgotten and broken and unable to be redeemed. God's love is recklessly given without limit. The abundant life God imagines for all knows no bounds. After all, this is the God who was dead and locked away in a tomb, only to be found to have taken death itself and transformed it into life for all. We might think we have no actual business being the sower at all. I mean, hasn't God seen our resume? Doesn't God know what we thought about that person who caused us to miss the green light or who keeps needing things from us? Doesn't God know what we think, what we really think of people who continue to enact cruelty and violence and hate in this world? Surely if God knew that about us, God wouldn't call us to be a sower. But it seems to me the sower in this parable has exactly zero worries about that. Though we might be tempted to believe it and to chase it, perfect is never the thing God calls God's people to. God has never once asked of us perfection. God has only ever asked us for faithfulness in love, in generosity, in goodness, in hope, in grace and mercy and forgiveness. So it has been just those few words that start this parable that has drawn me more fully into remembering all of this from my life, and I hope now yours too. A sower went out to sow. And in so doing, you and I come to see more and more what our life is called to be as disciples of Jesus. What we come to see is that God's love is reckless and irrational. God's love will take root in each and every place it lands in ways we never knew and in ways we can never imagine. And God has called us. God has called people such as you, people exactly like you, to be sowers such as this, for somewhere along the way, another sower casting seeds planted one deep in your heart, and it has surely taken root. But here's the deal. Let us not think it is up to us to bring these seeds to life. Let us not think that we need to be God. Let us be sowers who sow, just that, only that. For by doing so, we claim the truth for our lives, that just as we are now, and just who we are now, God is at work. And in so doing, we move ourselves to the side and let God's will be done. Isn't that the thing we are seeking after anyway? We need not be perfect for God to work through. We need not have it all worked out for God to show up. We only are called to be sowers who sow. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the sermon. And in that work, may you not forget, may you never forget, that God first planted seeds in your very soul without regard to any kind of soil that was there. Proclaiming to you then, and to you even now on this day, you are my beloved.